It wasn't the day I retired that changed everything. It wasn't cleaning out my office after 43 years. It wasn't shaking hands with people who called me irreplaceable. The hardest moment came 3 weeks later. A quiet Tuesday morning. The house was still. Sunlight rested across the kitchen table where my wife had already finished her coffee. She looked peaceful, comfortable, almost as if she'd been living this way for years. Maybe she had. I stood there with 2 mugs in my hands and asked the simplest question I could think of. "So, what should we do today?" She looked up from the crossword puzzle in front of her. A gentle smile crossed her face. "Oh," she said softly, "I already have plans." There wasn't anything wrong with those words. Not really. She wasn't being cruel. She wasn't trying to hurt me. She simply had a life that no longer waited for mine. That surprised me. For more than 4 decades, I believed retirement would be our reward. I imagined slow mornings together, long drives with no destination, family dinners that lasted until sunset, weekend visits with grandchildren, conversations we never had time to finish. Instead, I found myself standing in my own kitchen, wondering where everyone had gone. The strange part was this. Nobody had left. They had simply learned how to live without me. That realization stayed with me all day. It followed me into the garage. It sat beside me on the back porch. It even followed me to bed that night. Sleep didn't come easily. Not because I was worried about money. There was enough. Not because I regretted retiring. I had earned it. No, something much deeper refused to settle. A question, quiet, persistent. What exactly had all those years bought me? For most of my life, I thought I already knew the answer. Success, security, respect. Those words sounded solid when I was young, almost magical. Growing up, money always seemed to decide whether a family laughed or argued. My father worked harder than anyone I have ever known. 6 days a week, sometimes 7. His hands were rough before he turned 40. Every paycheck disappeared almost as quickly as it arrived. Bills came first. Everything else waited. Our house wasn't unhappy. Far from it. My parents loved each other deeply. But love couldn't stop the electricity from being shut off once during a bitter January. Love couldn't replace worn-out shoes. Love couldn't keep my mother from quietly crying over grocery receipts after she thought we had gone to sleep. Children notice more than adults realize, even when nobody says a word, especially then. One winter evening has stayed with me all these years. I couldn't have been older than 12. My mother placed the last piece of chicken on my plate. She smiled and said she wasn't hungry. Back then I believed her. Years later, I understood the truth. There simply wasn't enough for everyone. She chose me. That memory never left. Not once. Standing in that small kitchen, I made myself a promise. Someday my family would never have to choose between groceries and the electric bill. My children would never wonder whether there would be enough food. My wife would never hide tears behind a smile. Money, I decided, would solve everything. It sounded so reasonable. Maybe that's why I never questioned it. College wasn't really an option, not with our finances. So I found work wherever I could. Construction, warehouse shifts, night deliveries. Anything that paid a little better than the last job. None of it felt glamorous. None of it mattered. Every paycheck represented one step away from the life my parents had struggled through. By 24, I had landed an entry-level position at a manufacturing company. The salary wasn't impressive. The hours were long. But there was something even more valuable. Opportunity. The company rewarded people who stayed late, who volunteered for difficult assignments, who solved problems without complaining. That fit me perfectly. Hard work had always made sense. Around that same time, life surprised me in the best possible way. Her name was Margaret. We met because of a flat tire. Funny how life works sometimes. She was standing beside an old blue sedan outside the public library. The rear tire had gone completely flat. Several cars passed without slowing down. Mine almost did too. I was already running late. There was another shift waiting for me. Another supervisor who noticed every minute. For some reason, I pulled over anyway. She laughed before I even reached her. I should probably learn how to do this myself, she said. You probably should, I answered, but today isn't that day. She laughed again, a real laugh, the kind that makes you smile before you realize you're smiling too. Changing that tire took maybe 15 minutes. Talking with her afterward lasted nearly an hour. Work could wait. Somehow, it didn't feel important anymore. She taught second grade, loved mystery novels, couldn't keep houseplants alive, believed every stray dog deserved another chance. She talked with her hands. She listened without interrupting. And whenever she smiled, it felt as though the whole world relaxed for a moment. Our first dates weren't expensive. Most couldn't have been. We shared hamburgers at a diner downtown, walked through neighborhood parks, sat beside a lake with paper cups of coffee that always became cold before we finished talking. Those evenings felt rich, even though neither of us had much. One night, while we watched the sun disappear behind the trees, she leaned her head against my shoulder. You know what I want most? She asked. I guessed 100 different things. A bigger house, travel, a nicer car. She shook her head. I just want a peaceful life. That was all. Nothing extravagant, nothing complicated. A peaceful life. I reached for her hand. You'll have it, I promised. I'll make sure of that. Looking back now, I realized something painful. I meant every word. I simply misunderstood what peace really required. A year later, we stood inside a little white church with fewer than 50 guests. My father wore the same suit he'd owned for years. My mother cried before the ceremony even started. Margaret looked at me as though I were already enough. Not successful, not wealthy, just enough. I wish I had remembered that look longer. Our first apartment was tiny. The kitchen barely fit 2 people. The bedroom window rattled whenever trucks drove past. The refrigerator hummed so loudly we joked it was our third roommate. Still, those were happy days. Friday nights meant frozen pizza and old movies. Saturday mornings meant pancakes. Sunday afternoons meant walking through neighborhood garage sales even when we had no intention of buying anything. Life felt wonderfully ordinary. Then an opportunity appeared at work, a promotion. More responsibility, better pay, longer hours. I accepted before anyone finished explaining the position. It felt like the first real step toward the promise I had made all those years ago, toward security, toward success, toward the life I believed my family deserved. I had no idea that the road I had just chosen would slowly lead me somewhere else, somewhere I never intended to go. The raise felt like proof that I was finally becoming the man I had promised to be, not just for myself, for Margaret, for the family we hoped to build. The new position came with a nicer office, a better paycheck, and expectations that stretched far beyond 40 hours a week. That part didn't bother me. In fact, I welcomed it. Every late evening felt like another investment in our future. Every missed dinner seemed temporary. Every sacrifice had a purpose. At least that's what I believed. Margaret never asked me to slow down. She packed an extra sandwich when she knew I'd be working late. Sometimes she left handwritten notes inside my lunchbox. Don't forget to eat. I'll save you some pie. We miss you. The first 2 always made me smile. The last one, I usually folded away without thinking much about it. Our daughter Emily was born 2 years after our wedding. Holding her for the first time changed something inside me. She wrapped her tiny fingers around one of mine. For a moment, the whole world became very quiet. I whispered a promise she could never remember. You'll never know the kind of worry I grew up with. That promise became my compass. Everything I did pointed back to it. When Emily took her first steps, I was attending a conference 3 states away. Margaret recorded the moment on a little camcorder. We watched the tape together when I came home. Emily laughed as she stumbled across the living room. She looked toward the camera, toward her mother, not toward me. I smiled anyway. At least I didn't miss all of it, I joked. Margaret smiled too, but her eyes lingered on the television a little longer than mine. A year later, our son Daniel arrived. Life became louder, messier, happier. There were toys under the couch, crayons on the refrigerator, tiny shoes by the front door. Our little apartment felt too small, so I worked harder. The promotion after that came even faster. More responsibility, more travel, a larger salary, a larger house. Everyone congratulated me. Neighbors admired the new driveway. Co-workers asked how I climbed the ladder so quickly. I always gave the same answer. I just keep showing up. That was true. I always showed up. Just not always where it mattered most. The business trips began quietly. One overnight stay, then two. Soon they became part of normal life. Airports started feeling more familiar than my own neighborhood. Hotel rooms all looked the same after a while. The same paintings, the same white sheets, the same lonely silence after turning off the television. Every trip ended with a promise. I'll make it up to you when I get home. Margaret never argued. She simply nodded. I know. Those two words sounded comforting back then. Now they sound heartbreaking, because she really did know. She knew I would always choose work if work called. One spring afternoon, Emily stood by the front window wearing a little yellow dress. She was 6. Margaret had curled her hair that morning. The school talent show started at 6 o'clock. I had promised I would be there. Around 4, my manager stepped into my office. We need you in Chicago tonight. My daughter's performance is tonight. I know. He paused. But you're the only one who can handle this client. I looked at the clock. I looked at the family photo sitting beside my computer. Then I booked the flight. Simple as that. From Chicago, I called the house after the show ended. Emily answered. Daddy, how did you do? I remembered all my lines. I knew you would. There was a tiny pause. I looked for you. My mouth opened. Nothing came out. Finally, I said the only thing I had left. I'm sorry, sweetheart. It's okay. Children forgive so easily until they stop expecting. When I arrived home 2 days later, the yellow dress was hanging neatly inside her closet. Life moved forward, as it always does. Years passed almost without permission. Birthdays came and went. Soccer games, school concerts, parent-teacher meetings, science fairs, dance recitals. Sometimes I made them, often I didn't. Whenever guilt appeared, I silenced it with the same sentence. I'm doing this for them. It became more than an explanation. It became a shield. Every bonus reinforced it. Every promotion justified it. Every larger paycheck made it feel true. Friends admired what we'd built. The bigger house, the 2-car garage, summer vacations, college savings. People would smile and say, "You've made it." I smiled back. Inside, exhaustion had quietly become normal. One evening I arrived home after another 12-hour day. The kitchen lights were still on. Margaret sat alone at the table. 2 dinner plates rested between us. One was empty. The other had been covered with foil to keep it warm. She stood and reheated everything without saying a word. While we ate, I noticed a stack of drawings beside her. What's this? Daniel wanted to show you. I picked up the first picture. It showed our family standing together. Margaret, Emily, Daniel, a dog we didn't even own, and me, off to one side, wearing a tie, holding a briefcase. The office building behind me was almost larger than the family itself. Children draw what they understand. That picture stayed with me for days, long enough to make me uncomfortable, not long enough to make me change. That's the dangerous thing about small warnings. They fade one by one until something much larger replaces them. The years became measured by promotions instead of seasons. Emily entered high school. Daniel learned to drive. Gray hairs appeared around my temples. Margaret stopped asking what time I'd be home. Instead, she'd simply leave a plate in the oven. Sometimes we'd pass each other in the hallway like polite roommates. Always kind, always respectful, always tired. The distance between us wasn't created by one argument. It wasn't caused by betrayal, or anger, or cruelty. It grew quietly, like dust settling on furniture, almost invisible, until one day you notice how much has gathered. Looking back, I often wonder when the change truly began. Maybe it was the first promise I broke. Maybe it was the 100th. Perhaps there wasn't a single turning point at all, just thousands of ordinary choices, each one small enough to defend, each one reasonable, each one temporary. Together, they became a life. For a long time, I believed providing for my family was the greatest expression of love. That belief sounded noble, responsible, even honorable. Only much later did I discover something I wish someone had told me when I was still young enough to listen. A paycheck can support a family, but it cannot tuck a child into bed. It cannot laugh around the dinner table. It cannot sit beside someone on a difficult evening. Money can build a beautiful house. It cannot make people stay inside it together. I didn't understand that yet, not even close, because life was about to reward me again. And every reward pulled me one step farther from the people I thought I was protecting. The promotion came just before my 55th birthday. Vice President, a title I had imagined for years. The company held a dinner in my honor. People stood and applauded. My boss spoke about dedication. Someone joked that I practically lived at the office. The room laughed. So did I. Looking back, I'm not sure why. Margaret squeezed my hand beneath the table. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. I believed I saw happiness in her eyes. Now I think I saw relief. She hoped this would finally be enough. So did I. For a little while it seemed that way. The mortgage disappeared. College tuition was paid without loans. Emily graduated with honors. Daniel found his first engineering job. Our savings account kept growing. Every financial goal I had written down as a young man slowly disappeared from the list. One after another. I should have felt lighter. Instead, I accepted even more responsibility. Some habits become part of your identity. You stop choosing them. They begin choosing you. By then, my phone never stopped ringing. Clients called during dinner. Managers texted before sunrise. Weekends became extensions of weekdays. Vacations turned into mobile offices. Margaret stopped reminding me to leave my laptop at home. She already knew I wouldn't. One autumn evening, she walked into my study carrying 2 mugs of coffee. She placed one beside me. The other remained untouched in her hands. "I miss you," she said quietly. I looked up from the spreadsheet on my screen. "I'm right here." She smiled, not because I had said something sweet, because she knew I didn't understand. "No," she answered gently, "you really aren't." The words settled somewhere deep inside me, but only for a moment. An email notification chimed. I glanced back toward the computer. By the time I looked up again, she had already walked away. Some moments ask us to make a choice. I kept choosing the screen. Years later, I would remember that conversation more clearly than any business meeting. Success has a strange way of changing the people around you. Co-workers begin treating you differently. Neighbors assume you figured life out. Even your children become careful not to interrupt your schedule. Respect slowly turns into distance. At first that feels satisfying, then it feels lonely. Emily married when she was 28. The ceremony was beautiful. I was there, physically, but 2 hours before walking her down the aisle, I was outside the church taking conference calls inside a rental car. One of my colleagues later thanked me for handling a crisis on such an important day. I remember feeling proud. Today, that memory embarrasses me. The photographs from Emily's wedding still sit on a shelf in our living room. Whenever I look at them, I notice something I never saw before. In almost every picture, Margaret is looking at Emily. Emily is looking at her new husband. And I'm looking somewhere else, toward a phone that wasn't even in the frame. Daniel married 3 years later. By then, smartphones had become impossible to escape. Halfway through the reception, I slipped outside to answer another call. When I came back inside, the father-son dance had already ended. Daniel walked over and smiled. "No worries, Dad. We'll catch the next one." There wasn't a next one. Life doesn't always offer another dance. Time certainly doesn't. Still, I convinced myself everything would be different after retirement. That became my newest promise. When I retire. I said those words constantly. When I retire, we'll travel. When I retire, I'll spoil the grandkids. When I retire, we'll finally have breakfast together every morning. When I retire, life will slow down. Margaret never argued. She simply listened. Sometimes she smiled. Sometimes she just nodded. Looking back, I wonder if she had already stopped believing those promises, or perhaps she understood something I didn't. Tomorrow is the easiest place to hide today's priorities. Retirement finally arrived on a bright Friday afternoon. Co-workers filled the conference room. Someone made a slideshow. Photographs flashed across a large screen. There I was at 30, then 40, then 50. Award after award. Promotion after promotion. People clapped after every achievement. They called me loyal, dependable, driven. One young manager stood and said something that filled me with pride. "I hope I have a career like yours." If I could go back to that afternoon, I would answer him differently. I'd tell him to build a life first, then fit a career inside it, not the other way around. But wisdom usually arrives after the audience has gone home. When the farewell party ended, I carried 2 cardboard boxes to my car. One held family photographs. The other held 43 years of office memories, nameplates, awards, coffee mugs, pens that no longer work. The parking lot felt strangely quiet. I sat behind the steering wheel for several minutes before starting the engine. This was it. No alarm clock on Monday. No deadlines. No quarterly reports. The life I had postponed for decades was finally beginning. I smiled all the way home. Margaret greeted me with a hug that lasted longer than usual. "We made it," I whispered. She smiled warmly. "Yes," she said, "we did." The first weekend felt wonderful. We slept late, went out for breakfast, walked through a farmer's market, bought flowers we didn't really need. For the first time in years, my phone stayed silent. It felt almost luxurious. Monday morning arrived. I woke at 6 out of habit. The house was peaceful, no rushing, no meetings, no briefcase. Margaret was already in the kitchen reading a novel. She poured me a cup of coffee. We chatted for a while. It felt nice, comfortable, exactly as I had imagined, until she stood up. I should get going. Going where? I volunteer at the community library every Monday. I blinked. I didn't know that. She looked surprised. I've been doing it for almost 9 years. 9 years. I had no idea. She kissed my cheek. "I'll be back around lunchtime." Then she left. The house became incredibly quiet. I wandered from room to room, straightened magazines that were already straight, opened the refrigerator twice without being hungry, turned on the television, turned it off again. By noon, I was watching birds in the backyard, simply because I couldn't think of anything else to do. Margaret came home smiling. The children from the reading group were wonderful today. I smiled back. Inside, another feeling quietly appeared. Confusion. How could I not know something that had been part of my wife's life for nearly a decade? The answer was painfully simple. I had never asked. Tuesday brought another surprise. She met 2 friends for lunch. Wednesday was her gardening club. Thursday she helped our neighbor after knee surgery. Friday afternoon she met Emily for coffee. She had built an entire life while I was busy building a career. Not because she wanted distance, because life keeps moving, even when someone is absent. A week later I called Daniel. How about lunch tomorrow? There was a pause. I'd love to, Dad, but I've got meetings all day. Maybe next week. Next week became the week after. Then the month after that. Not because he didn't love me, because he had become exactly what I had taught him to become. Busy, responsible, always working. The same lesson I thought had protected my family had quietly passed to the next generation. That realization hurt more than I expected. One Saturday morning, Margaret and I drove to Emily's house. The grandchildren ran through the yard laughing. Their energy filled every corner of the garden. Our youngest grandson stopped in front of me. He studied my face for a moment. Then he tugged gently on his mother's sleeve. "Mom?" "Who's that?" Emily smiled kindly. "That's Grandpa." The little boy looked back at me. "Oh." Then he ran away to keep playing. He wasn't being rude. He simply didn't need me. Children cannot miss someone they've rarely seen. I stood there holding a wrapped birthday present that suddenly felt much heavier than it had a minute before. For years, I believed retirement would return everything I had postponed. Instead, it revealed something I had been too busy to notice. Life hadn't been waiting for me. It had already happened. That evening, the house settled into its usual quiet. Margaret curled up in her favorite chair with a novel. I turned on the television. 10 minutes later, I realized I hadn't heard a single word. My thoughts were somewhere else. Without really knowing why, I walked into the hallway closet looking for an old photo album. Instead, I found 3 dusty boxes. Each one was filled with photographs, birthday cards, school programs, vacation brochures, little pieces of a life that had somehow slipped past me. I carried the boxes into the living room. Margaret looked over the top of her book. "I haven't opened those in years," she said. "Maybe it's time." She smiled, then joined me on the floor. For the next hour, neither of us rushed. We simply looked, one photograph at a time. The first picture showed Emily sitting on the front porch. She couldn't have been more than 4. She held a paper crown from preschool. Her smile stretched from ear to ear. On the back, Margaret had written, "Emily's first school play." I stared at the words. Nothing came. No memory. No image. No sound. Just an empty space where that evening should have been. "I wasn't there," I finally whispered. Margaret shook her head. "You were in Denver." I nodded slowly. I remember the trip. That answer surprised even me. I remembered the business trip. I couldn't remember my daughter's first performance. The realization sat heavily between us. Another photograph. Daniel, 8 years old. His front tooth was missing. He held a fishing pole almost twice his height. The lake behind him sparkled in the afternoon sun. I smiled. I taught him to fish there. Margaret looked at the picture for a moment. "No," she answered gently. "My brother took him." I looked back at the photograph. For years I had carried a memory that wasn't mine. Maybe I had wanted it badly enough that my mind quietly created it. Memory can be kind like that, until the truth arrives. We kept turning pages, Christmas mornings, camping trips, science fairs, family reunions. Every picture told two stories, one about the people inside it, another about the person missing from it too often. That person was me. The strange thing was this: nobody in the photographs looked angry. Nobody looked abandoned. Life had continued beautifully. It had simply continued without waiting for me. That truth hurt more than guilt. It hurt because it was ordinary. There had never been one dramatic mistake, no single disaster, no explosive argument, just thousands of ordinary evenings, each one traded for another meeting, another flight, another deadline. When viewed alone, each choice looked reasonable. Together, they became a lifetime. Margaret reached into the bottom of one box. She pulled out a folded piece of construction paper. The edges were faded. The crayons had lost some of their color. "What is that?" I asked. She unfolded it carefully. Inside was a handmade Father's Day card, blue stick figures, yellow sunshine, a crooked red heart. Across the front, Daniel had written in uneven letters, "My dad works very hard." Inside was one more sentence: "Maybe next Sunday we can play catch." I couldn't speak. The card had never reached me. Or maybe it had. Maybe it disappeared beneath reports and paperwork on my desk. I honestly didn't know. Some losses don't happen because people stop loving each other. They happen because life becomes too crowded, too noisy, too fast. Margaret folded the card again. "I thought you'd want to see it someday." I nodded. "I'm glad you kept it." "So am I." Later that afternoon, I walked out onto the back porch alone. Across the street, a young father was teaching his little girl to ride a bicycle. He jogged beside her with one hand on the seat. She laughed every few seconds. Finally, he let go. She pedaled on her own. The father stopped running. He stood in the middle of the street applauding. The little girl turned around. "Dad, I'm doing it." Her excitement echoed through the neighborhood. Without warning, another memory found me. Daniel, about 7 years old, standing beside his own bicycle. He had waited all week for Saturday. We had planned to spend the morning together. Instead, my office called. An important client had changed the schedule. "I'll teach you tomorrow," I promised. Tomorrow never came. When I returned that evening, Daniel was already riding around the driveway. Margaret waved from the front steps. "He figured it out," she said. "No," Daniel corrected proudly. "Mom taught me." At the time, I smiled with relief. The problem had been solved. Only now did I understand. It wasn't about the bicycle. It was about who wasn't there. Children don't remember every gift. They remember who clapped when they finally rode alone. The next Sunday, I asked Margaret if she'd like to take a drive. "No plans," I said. "No schedule." She smiled. "I'd like that." We drove through quiet country roads, past old barns, cornfields, little diners that looked unchanged for 50 years. Eventually we stopped for lunch. Nothing fancy, just soup, coffee, and homemade pie. For a while neither of us spoke. Not because we had nothing to say, because we had finally stopped rushing. The waitress refilled our coffee. Outside, an elderly couple walked slowly across the parking lot. They held hands, not tightly, just naturally, as though they had done it every day for decades. Margaret watched them disappear. "We used to be like that." I looked at her. "Weren't we?" She smiled softly. "We used to have time to notice each other." Those words stayed with me. Time. I had spent my whole life trying to earn more money. I had never realized I was spending something far more valuable. On the drive home, I finally asked the question that had lived inside me for weeks. "Margaret." She turned toward me. "Did I fail you?" She didn't answer right away. She watched the trees slide past the window. Then she looked back at me. Her expression was calm, almost peaceful. "No." Relief washed over me, only for a second. Then she continued, "You gave us everything we needed." She paused. Her eyes never left mine. "Except yourself. Nothing else." No accusation, no anger, no tears, just the truth. Simple, quiet, impossible to escape. I tightened my hands around the steering wheel. Every late meeting came rushing back. Every birthday. Every canceled trip. Every bedtime story I planned to read later. I had always believed love meant sacrifice. Maybe it does, but I had sacrificed the wrong thing. I gave my family comfort. I gave them security. I gave them opportunities. What I failed to give them was enough of me. We drove the rest of the way in silence, not because the conversation was over, because it had finally begun. That night, sleep wouldn't come. I wasn't thinking about promotions anymore, or awards, or bonuses. My mind wandered somewhere else, back to ordinary evenings, back to small moments, back to the life that had quietly unfolded while I was busy planning a better one. I couldn't stop wondering. How many ordinary moments had already passed me by? I never knew what they were worth, not until they were gone. For several days, I carried Margaret's words with me, not like a burden, more like a compass I should have been using all along. You gave us everything we needed. Except yourself. I repeated that sentence while making coffee, while walking through the neighborhood, while lying awake after midnight. The strange thing was this. It didn't make me feel hopeless. It made me feel awake. For the first time in years, I stopped asking myself what I had accomplished. Instead, I asked a different question. Who still needed me today? The answer surprised me. More people than I expected. I called Emily first, not because I had something important to say. I simply wanted to hear her voice. She answered after the second ring. "Hi, Dad." Her voice sounded warm, busy, happy. We talked for almost 20 minutes. Nothing remarkable happened. We spoke about the weather, her garden, the grandchildren starting another school year. Before hanging up, she laughed. "You've called 3 times this week." "I know. I like it." There was a short silence. "So do I." That conversation stayed with me all afternoon. Not because it was extraordinary, because it wasn't. I had spent years believing meaningful moments had to be memorable. They don't. Most meaningful moments feel completely ordinary while they're happening. The next morning, I called Daniel. He sounded surprised. "Everything okay?" "Everything's fine. I was wondering if you'd like to have breakfast." He laughed. "Breakfast? On a Wednesday?" "Why not?" He checked his calendar. "I can make time." That sentence caught me off guard. Not because he suddenly had free time, because he chose to create it. Maybe I could have done the same all those years. If only I had understood what was truly important. Breakfast lasted just over an hour. We talked about his work, his children, the old pickup truck he was restoring in his garage. At one point he looked at me and smiled. "You know, I've missed this. So have I." Neither of us mentioned the years between us. We didn't need to. Healing doesn't always begin with apologies. Sometimes it begins with showing up. Week by week, little things started changing. I visited the grandchildren without waiting for birthdays. We baked cookies together, played board games, built birdhouses that leaned slightly to one side. They laughed every time mine turned out crooked. I laughed too. For years I had measured success by efficiency. Children measure it differently. If you're laughing beside them, you're already doing well. One Saturday afternoon, my youngest grandson climbed into my lap while we watched squirrels chase each other across the backyard. Without looking up, he asked, "Grandpa?" "Yeah? Are you coming again next weekend?" I smiled. "If your mom says it's okay." He nodded. "Good. I like when you're here." Such a small sentence. 6 simple words. I would have traded every award in my office to hear them 30 years earlier. Margaret noticed the changes before I did. One morning, she looked across the breakfast table and smiled. "You don't check your phone anymore." I laughed. "It hardly rings." "It used to." It did. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "I like this version of you." I lowered my eyes toward my coffee. "So do I." That might have been the greatest compliment I ever received, not because it praised who I had become, because it reminded me that I could still become someone better. Age doesn't erase regret, but it doesn't prevent growth either. One afternoon I began volunteering at the community library, the same one where Margaret had spent nearly a decade reading with children. I asked if they needed another pair of hands. The librarian smiled. "We always do." Every Thursday morning I sat with children learning to read. Some struggled through every sentence, others rushed ahead.
Whenever one of them finished a page without help, their face lit up.
I found myself clapping almost without thinking. Perhaps I was applauding them. Perhaps I was quietly applauding every moment I still had left. Life became smaller. The calendar looked almost empty compared with my working years. No conferences, no flights, no endless meetings. Yet somehow, my days felt fuller than ever before. Not because I was doing more, because I was finally present for what I was doing. One evening, Margaret and I carried 2 lawn chairs into the backyard. The sun had almost disappeared. The sky glowed with soft shades of orange and pink. We didn't talk much. We didn't need to. After a while, she rested her head against my shoulder, just as she had done beside that lake more than 50 years earlier. "I've missed this," she whispered. "So have I." The words sounded different now. They weren't filled with regret. They were filled with gratitude. We still had today. Not everyone gets that gift. As the years passed, friends began leaving us. Funerals became more common than weddings. Empty seats appeared at holiday dinners. The world grew quieter. Moments like those have a way of clarifying everything. No one stood at a funeral talking about promotions. Nobody admired a retirement account. People remembered something else: a laugh, a kind word, a helping hand, the way someone made others feel. That's what remained. Not titles, not salaries, just love made visible through ordinary moments. Sometimes younger people ask whether I regret working so hard. The answer surprises them. No, I don't regret working. Work gave my family stability. It gave us opportunities my parents could never have imagined. I'm grateful for that. What I regret is believing success could wait until life was over. Life was happening while I was making plans for it. I thought I had plenty of time. Most of us do. Until one day we realize we don't. If I could speak to the younger version of myself, I wouldn't tell him to quit his job. I wouldn't tell him to chase less. I'd tell him to look up more often. Go home for dinner. Leave the office before another meeting begins. Sit on the floor with the children. Take the long walk. Listen to your wife finish the story. Don't assume tomorrow will always be available. Ordinary days disappear faster than extraordinary ones. Protect them, because they become your life. These days, my mornings begin the same way. I wake before sunrise. Old habits never completely disappear. I quietly make 2 cups of coffee. Margaret joins me a few minutes later. We sit on the back porch wrapped in light sweaters, even during early spring. The birds usually arrive before the sun does. Neither of us speaks very much. The silence feels different now. Years ago, silence meant distance. Today, it feels like peace. Sometimes Margaret reaches for my hand. Sometimes I reach for hers. Either way, one of us always does. The sun slowly rises above the trees. Its light spreads across the yard. Everything looks ordinary. The old fence, the bird feeder, the worn wooden steps leading into the garden. Nothing about the scene would impress a stranger. Yet I wouldn't trade those mornings for anything I once chased. not another promotion, not another corner office, not another bonus, because I finally understand something that took me a lifetime to learn. Success filled my bank account. Love filled my life. Only one of those still matters when the morning is quiet. So, if you ever find yourself wondering what real wealth looks like, I hope you don't picture a larger house or another title. I hope you picture someone waiting to share a cup of coffee with you as the sun comes up. Someone who still reaches for your hand. Someone who is grateful that you came home. For me, that has become the richest part of my life. And if I have learned anything worth passing on, it is this. Don't wait until retirement to start living the life you're working so hard to build. Because one ordinary morning, you may discover that the moments you were saving for were quietly passing by all along. If this story reminded you of someone you love, I hope you'll give them a call today. And if these quiet conversations about life, family, and growing older bring you comfort, I'd be honored if you subscribed and joined me again. Until next time, take good care of yourself and the people who are still close enough to hold your hand.